There's no way that we could really do worship without having musicians here to lead us and also to move our hearts from that place, whatever place you walked in the door with. Can we just have a moment of prayer? Almighty One, I pray that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts might be acceptable in your sight, for you alone are our rock and our Redeemer. So, you probably saw this study this week about the bad effects of salt in your diet, right? Yeah. If you've been to the doctor, the doctor's probably saying, yeah, watch the salt. How many times have we been told this? Years and years ago, when I was learning to cook, my mother had just been put on a low-salt diet for her high blood pressure, and so I never put salt in anything while I'm cooking because I just didn't learn that way. But the fact is, human beings kind of crave salt. You can't even have anything truly sweet without a little bit of salt in it to make the sweet come out. And so, I listen to these things and I think, yes, we need to worry about the salt in our diet and eat less processed food and more fresh food. Yeah, we've got all of that. We tend to think of salt primarily in terms of our diet. But if we want to hear what Jesus has to say to us about salt and light, and this is the passage after the Beatitudes. So he's done all the blessed are those, and now he's saying this strange thing about salt and light, which almost gets stranger the more you think about it. For the people of Jesus' time, salt was not something that came in a shaker that you put on your food. It was something in which your food was bathed so that it would last. Salt was the only way to preserve food for most people in that region because it was so dry. And ice chunks, not a happening thing. So, when people thought of salt, they thought about it a little differently than we do. They thought about it as this necessary mineral which was a cost of doing business for anybody who had anything to do with food. In fact, salt was metaphorical as well as practical, because they would talk about salt as being the thing that held things together, that prevented decay. And so in Scripture, when you read the word salt, especially in the New Testament, there is this sense of keeping the covenant together, of things staying stable. Because the effect of salt was to stabilize organic materials, mostly food. But salt was used in other ways that we probably don't use it, unless you're a really avid gardener. Do any of you use Epsom salts in your garden? Yeah, see, a few people use Epsom salts, all right. Because salt changes the soil composition, right? Not only does it kill all the slugs and all that kind of stuff, but it changes the composition of the soil, and certain kinds of crops really need that. But salt, like many things in life, can be used carefully or too much. The other thing about salt that the people of Jesus' time would have known was that it was a common form of after conflict terrorism for the conquerors to salt the fields of their enemies with so much salt that nothing would grow. Think Roundup. That's essentially what Roundup does. Same thing. So they would salt the fields, and it would be years before there would be enough rainfall, especially in that region, years before the soil would produce again. So, on one hand, you needed some salt. On the other hand, if you had too much salt, then everything was ruined for quite a while. The light part of this passage is kind of simple. I mean, any of us who have ever had a source of light that didn't come from an overhead light that you turn on with a switch know that if you have a lantern and you put it up on a lampstand, it throws more light to the rest of the room. And of course, Jesus wants us to be that light, Although it isn't always clear how Jesus expects us to be that light. And that's why I found myself focusing more on the salt. Because there's a very odd little phrase in this passage that says, if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be restored? Well, for years, I can remember thinking, gosh, Jesus didn't know much about salt. Salt doesn't lose its saltiness. That doesn't work that way. It's a mineral. It's not like the herbs you have in your cabinet that, if you keep the oregano enough years, eventually it won't taste like anything. Just saying. Salt doesn't work that way. It's as salty now as it'll be in 20 years. Well, Jesus wasn't stupid. He knew that. So what was he trying to say? Well, first of all, he was trying to get his audience to laugh. There are a lot of jokes in the teachings of Jesus that we kind of miss because it's the Bible, we can't laugh. But Jesus intended for us to laugh. Oh, what a silly thing. Salt that loses its saltiness can't happen. And that's where we get the light and the understanding of the light. If Jesus is truly in our hearts, we shine. And it can't really be hidden except maybe with a bushel basket. Just like when little kids are out playing, their joy shines no matter what. You don't even have to speak the language those little kids are speaking. You know they're having fun. And they glow. Well, that's how the salt is too. If we really are full of Jesus, then we add salt to the mix. We question things that other people might assume are facts completely in evidence. We bring a different kind of conversation, a different kind of understanding to the lives we lead. And how exactly does that work? Well, in this current political climate, there's all kinds of need for salt and light, right? All around us. Light, because now that we have the concept of alternative facts, there's a need to evaluate everyone's statements differently. To actually go track down that assertion and find out if it is true. About the simplest kinds of things. Somebody says to you, wow, those people who moved in down the street, I don't know, I don't think they really belong here. ... Why? Just because they're new? Well, by definition, when you move into a house, you're new. Or is it because they don't really look like us? Whatever us is. Or they have a different kind of car than we do. Or maybe just because we don't know them. I grew up in northern Vermont, and we used to talk about people from away. It was not a good thing. No, people from away were suspect. If you were raised in New Jersey or Massachusetts or Canada or New Hampshire, you were somebody from away. And you weren't really trusted for, 10, 15, 20 years. You could own property, you could vote, you could pay your taxes, you could participate in civic life, you could be the soul of the kids' soccer team. You were still somebody from away. And you know, it's a really hard prejudice to undo. Even now that I live in Florida, so now I'm someone from away, the temptation to see people as somehow other because, hey, they're from away. It's so tempting. And when other people do it casually, we need to be light. We need to shine light on that. Oh, really? Well, what about them is different? And sometimes we need to be salt. Some of us have no problems at all being salt. Yeah, some of us have an opinion about just about everything, and we're happy to share it. Remember, if you salt the fields too much, everything dies. But I think, increasingly, we need to be salt because people are afraid of anything that doesn't kind of go along to get along. So if all of a sudden there are refugees standing in airports unable to get back into the country where they live and work, wow, maybe something needs to be said about that. If in the midst of a public conversation about, how should we do our trash service or something, somebody says, oh, those renters, they all leave their cans all over the place. Something probably needs to be said about that. If we find ourselves looking at what's being promoted as some kind of basic American value, we need to question that. Is it really a value? Or is that just what we've always done? When people say to us, oh no, the church should never get involved in politics. We should never say anything about politics. I find myself thinking, maybe some salt might be needed in that conversation. Let's look at what Jesus did. Jesus had the audacity to question the scribes and the Pharisees. Really? Jesus said, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees. Again, there was probably a giggle in the crowd. You couldn't exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. They were the guys walking around with big long fringes. They were the ones who prayed over everything. They were the ones who got the best seat in the synagogue because they were more religious. I know you all know some of these people. Oh, we're talking about Jesus, yeah. Unless your righteousness exceeds that, unless you can get beyond just saying all the right religious things and get to actually doing the things that make for peace, unless you're being salt and light, then you're not exceeding the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. This is really hard stuff. It's hard for those of us who are trained to always be nice. It's hard for those of us who, frankly, have been able to get along because we've hidden parts of ourselves in order to make ourselves a little more acceptable to everybody else. And now, we're going to start making trouble? I think the answer is yes. Because we don't really have a choice. When people say stuff that's just a blatant lie, those people, anything that starts with those people is probably not what we want to hear, okay? Those people are doing X, Y, Z. At the point when we hear that, if we cannot shine light on that situation, if we cannot be a little salt, then who will do that? We who have been called by Jesus Christ, we who have been loved into righteousness, we who have felt God's incredible favor and relationship, it's on us. Now, in every situation, what is salt and what is light might be up for some disagreement. My salt might be your light. But we can't afford to be bland and silent and dark, because the world needs us too much. Somehow, We need to figure out what this law is, what this commandment is to us. It says in the scripture that nothing can be taken away. You can't add anything, you can't take anything away. So we have to read it with the eyes of light and be willing to interpret it with more than a grain of salt. That's not always going to result in us having the same opinion about what to do. But we're also assured of something that the rest of the world really isn't, which is that even if we disagree, and this is the great gift of the United Church of Christ, that even when we disagree in love. That when we disagree, we respect the viewpoint of somebody else. That when somebody says, oh, we should do this thing, and we say, no, we really think we should do that one, we are still bound in love and community. When we say light and someone else says salt, it's okay. They're both needed. But we can't afford to do nothing and say nothing. We are called to have a righteousness that exceeds even the Pharisees, who knew every single little law, who could talk chapter and verse about exactly what was said in the past and what the text actually said. We are required to exceed that. And instead of just talking about God, to truly act in love. So I hope this week will be a little bit challenging for you. I hope that there will be a situation where it's clear whether the need is for light or for salt. I hope that you'll have one of those moments when you're able to say out of the depth of your faith in Jesus Christ, let me look at this another way. I hope that you'll be able to reach your hand out to people who are terrified right now, to people who are afraid that everything will change, and say, you know what? You can hold on to God's unchanging hand. It's okay. We stand on the rock. It's going to be all right. I hope that when people know you as a Christian, and know you as a member of Faith Family, they'll know, oh, if I need someone who's going to welcome me extravagantly, I can go to them. They'll do that. If we need someone who understands love and diversity, oh yeah, the folks at Faith Family, they can do that. You have a unique mission in this community. And each of you has a unique mission in the world. To be salt and light. And to be God for those who so desperately need to hear a word from the Lord today and all this week. Amen.